Hey all, this is second video for the week. Apologize for uh, video voice issues. Hopefully this one works better. I'm gonna record these as two more short videos. So this one I'm gonna record on the Ultimatum game, and I'm gonna talk about what our author has to say about business ethics being an oxymoron. And then I'll record one more video for this first chapter on ethical relativism. And then, of course, we've got the second chapter coming up, so I'll get those up as well. I recognize this is a lot for the first week of the course. We'll catch up. Things will slow down over the next couple weeks, so don't worry if you sort of don't get every single one of these done by Thursday. I recognize we're sort of front loaded and things will slow down. So deep breath. It'll all be okay. Okay, so this video I'm going to talk about the Ultimatum game. This is a really cool experiment in, well, social economics. It's one of the seminal experiments that draws a distinction between what we call classical economics and then what becomes known as, contemporary economics, right? But it leads to, it's one of many experiments that leads to the development of what we call social or behavioral economics. I'm going to talk about this experiment, why it's important for economics, and I'm going to talk about why it's important for this course, a professional ethics course. If you look back at the history of economics in the 20th century, even in like the late 19th century, classical economics assumed a couple things about humans, right? So economics as a science, in scare quotes, what you're doing in economics is you're trying to build models of human behavior, of economies, that are supposed to tell us how to sort of influence people to get desired results. Typically, you want to maximize general profit. Why? Because that's supposed to be overall good for an economy, for a society, for the people, right? So it's in some ways, economics is applied utilitarian or applied consequentialist thought. We're making the world better by maxing overall wealth. Wealth itself is a kind of freedom, so it's a kind of control that people might have if they lived in an economy that wasn't as prosperous or as successful. And our textbook actually talks about this approach to economics in a very indirect way, right? He talks about the social function of business, especially in the chapter, the second chapter. And he sees the social function of business is largely to increase profit. Why? Because that's better overall for society, right? Very standard view in economics. Anyways, under classical economics, it's assumed that humans are rational animals, and as rational animals, we, provided there's no noise, will always do the thing that's in our best interest. We're what's called a rational, idealized min-maxer, right? What does that mean? What we want to do is we want to minimize harms for ourselves or minimize losses, and we want to maximize profit or pleasure or successes, right? So if you think about humans as a rational agent and as a mini-maxer, what we are is an agent that always thinks logically and carefully about the scenarios that we encounter in the world, and then we go, which one is going to lead to the most profit for me, offset by any sort of costs? That's the thing I should always do. And classical economics was built upon this model of humanity. What they said is, at our best, humans are these rational creatures that'll be trying to maximize our best interests. What happens is that we have all sorts of interference that gets in the way, right? We're emotional. We maybe don't have all the facts. And so you put us in a situation, we'll miss things and we'll make a choice that's not actually in our best interest. But that's not because we're being rational. It's just because we've incomplete info, or we're, failing to be a proper human in the sense of we're failing to be fully rational. We are swayed by emotions or something like that. And that was the model that they went with. And that was the default view in economics for a good century, right? Even today, you'll find a lot of economic models that are built on this idea that that's the kind of creature we are. What the Ultimatum game does, and what a number of experiments very similar to this one do, is they challenge that picture of humanity. They give some empirically supported arguments. So they give some data, and then they give some very reasonable ways to interpret that data that would suggest that that's not really how we work. So here's the Ultimatum game. You take a sum of money. So let's say I take $100 and I divide it between two people, right? So we got two people, they're partners in this game. I don't know, Lindsay and Stuart, right? So we give Lindsay $100 and we say, now, Lindsay, you get to keep as much of this money as you want, provided that your partner Stuart agrees to the distribution. So what we're going to do is you take this $100, you decide how you're going to divide it up, and then we'll take that offer over to Stuart, and provided Stuart says, yeah, I accept that, the money's yours and Stuart's. Now, what classical economics predicted is that if Lindsay and Stuart are rational agents and they're idealized min-maxers, Lindsay is going to offer herself $99 out of 100. That's the maximum offer she can offer herself, right? She wants to maximize her profit. The rational thing to do is to give herself as much as possible. Stuart, being a rational agent, will take any offer where he has more money than he would otherwise. So he ought to accept the $1 offer from Lindsay. He is better off if he accepts that offer. It's not like they can go back to the drawing board, right? If she offers him $1, it's not like he can go back to her and say, no, I won't take $1, but I'll take 50 or 30. So he either accepts the offer or doesn't. So as a rational agent, he should think, well, I'm better off with $1 than I am with no money, so I accept this offer. And the sort of solution to the ultimatum game for Lindsay is to offer Stuart $99, is to offer herself $99 and to offer Stuart $1. That's the ideal solution under classical economics. But of course, when I say that, right, and you all surely see this, right? Virtually no human would accept that offer, right? If I came to you and I said, here you go, here's $1 and I'm going to keep 99 for myself, you'd be like, no way, right? I don't want, that's not fair. Why should I let you profit where I'm just getting this measly token? That's not just, that's not equal, that's not fair. No, you don't get anything. I reject the offer, right? That's what the vast majority of us should do. Now, under classical economics, that sounds ludicrous. That's irrational behavior. Why on earth would I take less for myself? Why would I reject the $1 offer? No reason to do so. I'm harming myself to harm somebody else. Incoherent. But what the ultimatum game shows, and we all know this right away, right, is that we're not idealized rational min-maxers. We are motivated by a whole bunch of things. Is our behavior in the ultimatum game irrational? The fact that we reject a $1 offer, is that irrational? A lot of people said, no, that's the rational thing to do, because it's not a fair offer. We're getting taken advantage of. Stuart's getting used or manipulated or otherwise exploited by Lindsay for massive gain. And what the rational thing for us to do in that scenario is to fight back, really, right? It's to punish Lindsay for being unethical, for being unjust, for being unfair. And so that's what we do, right? Unless the offers are roughly equal. You know, like if Lindsay had offered Stuart $40, he might accept that. He might be, it's not really fair, but okay, right? But really, what should happen is the offers should run around 50-50, right? And most people, when they play the ultimatum game, that's just what they do, right? And we know this. We know that in groups, if we want the rest of the group to cooperate with us, we should treat each other fairly and justly. No place for that idea in classical economic theory. And so one of the ways that impacts economics as a discipline is this study, and a lot of studies that show very similar things lead people to think, well, maybe humans are much more complicated, and maybe the kinds of models of human behavior we want to build in economics need to take account of these things. They need to take account of our social customs, things like justice and fairness, and maybe ethical behavior. We shouldn't write those off as irrational. If we really want economic models that speak to humanity and are useful in practice, they need to take into account this kind of complexity of us. For our purposes, what this might show, right, is that we are ethical creatures, right? That we are not idealized rational min-maxers. We seem to be intrinsically motivated by moral demands on our actions, such as fairness, right? The kind of animal that a human is looks like they are committed in some deep way to basic moral principles like fairness and justice and responsibility and accountability and giving people what they deserve. And if that's true, well, then this kind of very standard objection to moral philosophy, why do ethics? Shouldn't I just act out of self-interest? You might say something like, well, that's true, but only of creatures that aren't really humans. To be human is to be committed to morality. It's just part of the very fabric of how our brains work and how we get along with each other, that we are creatures that are committed deeply to general moral principles in thought and behavior, right? Your text makes a big deal of this, right? Contrasting psychopaths with non-psychopathic agents, right? And again, they have a simplification. We talked about this last video, but look, the agent that is not motivated by moral demands is radically different from the vast majority of us, right? We don't go to work wanting to exploit each other and manipulate each other and lie to each other and cheat each other. Sometimes we do those things, right? But not because of like at least not for most of us, not out of a conscious desire to do that. We do it because we think in this weird scenario it's somehow justified, or something's happened about the way our organization is structured that encourages us to or motivates us to cheat, manipulate, exploit. But in practice, the vast majority of humans, when we interact with each other, want to be kind. We want to be compassionate. We want to care about each other. We want to be just and fair. And that's just the kind of animal we are. So this question, why be moral? Our text would argue, given a lot of moral psychology and a lot of behavioral economics, that's the wrong question to ask. We are moral agents. What we want to understand is, what kind of a moral agent are we? How are we motivated? And is that a good thing or a bad thing? How do we live given the reality that humans are the kind of animal that's more motivated by moral considerations? And that's the lesson our text draws from the Ultimatum. For our course, the purpose there is, hey, look, humans just are moral agents. We're not perfect moral agents. We get things wrong, but we are agents that try to be good, try to respect one another, that do care about each other. Okay, so that's the Ultimatum game. We'll talk more about the Ultimatum game on Thursday. I think it's one of the things from this week that's important to understand. Second issue for this video. Your text talks about business ethics being an oxymoron, right? Here's another objection to business ethics as sort of or professional ethics as a general way to think about the world. You might go, what a waste of time, right? Business is about maximizing overall profit. Ethics is constraints on actions and behavior based on general moral principles. There's no place in business for ethics, right? It's contradictory to think about business and ethics in the same sentence. So why are we here? I added the sentence, the government is useless, because I think the point here he's making generalizes about the way we talk about institutions. A lot of people will say things like, all public servants should be fired. The government is useless. What a waste of money. Governments can't do anything right. Right? Again, very common sentiment in certain parts of the political spectrum is just the idea that governments have value is a mistake. I want to try to argue here that the claims that our textbook is making about business ethics being an oxymoron would equally apply to any talk about institutions as well being useless. So let's see if we can get this point out. Why does your text think that it's a mistake to say business ethics is an oxymoron? What he wants to say is, well, look, we know immediately, even those of us that say business ethics are an oxymoron, right? Like, that's a bad joke. It's a very dismissive joke of like the idea that morality or good behavior can have any place in the business world. And he says, look, even when we say that, we know that not all businesses are evil, right? In fact, the vast majority of people that work in business are actually quite nice people, right? And well-intentioned. And most people, if you really press them, are going to say, hey, look, there's probably some CEOs out there that are jerks, right? And maybe some that are even, should just go to jail. But I don't really believe that every single person that owns a business should go to jail. They're not all evil people. That's not how businesses operate. And if they did operate that way, why on earth would we want businesses in our society, right? I think push comes to shove, most people think that way. And our text definitely, this is what he's trying to point out. Likewise with the government, right? When people say things like governments are useless, governments can't do anything right, governments are just so ineffective, they don't do. Again, that's a very idealistic and very simplistic way of talking about governments, right? You'd be hard pressed if you sort of talked very carefully through it to find somebody that thought every single person who works for the government should be fired, right? Or that every single person that works for the government is useless. Like, think about extending that claim, right? The RCMP, the teachers, the nurses, the doctors, the firefighters, middle managers across the province, right? People that process passport applications, right? People that work in the energy and oil sector, right? All of these people are government employees. When we talk about the government, we don't really mean, or the vast majority of us don't really mean, that every single person that works for the government is useless and incapable of doing their job, and that the government just ruins everything. What we mean is that there's a certain way of thinking about the government, right? Certain high profile parts of the government that kind of really annoy certain people and make certain people feel like governments just are ineffective and don't do their job, right? And then a lot of politicians take advantage of that public sentiment and use it to get themselves elected, right? We say things like, all politicians are corrupt. And then you vote for the politician that's saying that the loudest. And then they are often one of the most corrupt people around, right? And then we get these, what we really mean is that the politicians that are, that we're voting for, they're just corrupt, right? And they're ineffective. But the vast majority of people in the government is just these institutions and systems that do things like process your paychecks, right? Or make sure that you have a health card. We don't typically mean when we say governments are useless or governments are ineffective or, the whole government should be fired, that every single one of those people has no role and can't do their job. That's just gross oversimplification, right? And gross misunderstanding of what a government works like and how it works and how it operates. Likewise with businesses, when we say businesses are evil or, business ethics is an oxymoron, and then we just dismiss the study of business and the moral principles behind it as if it's kind of a waste of time. It's to just be so idealistic and simplistic about the way you talk about these institutions that you're not sort of having an adult, careful discussion that's of any value. You're just dismissing it. It sounds good or funny. What your text wants to argue is that the real problem with businesses and with things like governments and other institutions, whether they're not for profits or, what have you, is that we don't typically, as a society and as a collective, interact with these things in any sort of adult way. We don't engage. We talk about doing so, but we don't engage in any sort of deep way with a discussion about policy and procedure and how institutions are structured and how they could be better and the role that they function in society. And he thinks that's what we really should be doing. And that's really what business ethics is let's look at these institutions that make up such a huge part of our life, and let's look at them carefully, and then let's talk about how they can be better. And he thinks there's immense value in the project. So when we think about these types of things, here's a couple problems, right, that he thinks are legit problems, rather than business ethics being an oxymoron or governments just being useless. The real problems with these things, number one, we collectively are too idealistic and simplistic when we talk about these things. And so the result of that is that we lack a useful public dialogue about what we want out of our institutions and how to get them. Again, think about political debates, right? Political debates have become just like tweets or TikToks or like just little slogans, right? With one politician, calling the other names and the other one calling the other names back, right? And just lying left and right, rather than having sort of any coherent or meaningful dialogue or discussion about anything either of them wants to do, right? The parties have political platforms and they have plans, and you can read those. They're typical, they're published before an election, right? In theory, we should at least know what our politicians are planning to do so we can respond to them. But we don't ever have a public discussion of that, right? They just yell at each other and call each other names. And then we take that as meaningful information rather than just noise. But it's not argues our text, right? To have this kind of just simple, idealistic, who's bad, who's good. What you really want to do in both the realm of politics and the realm of, say, business is you want to look at boring things. You want to look at policies. Who's got the best energy policy? Whose platform is most likely to lead to a sustainable increase in our energy grid, right? What is the actual job of this politician that we're looking at, right? Are they supposed to be running the military? Are they supposed to be the Fed? Or are they supposed to be doing things like running healthcare and education? And if that's what they're doing, what plans do they have related to those things? And are they reasonable, right? That should be where our public dialogue is and our election debates, but that's not where we typically go. Likewise with businesses, what does this business do? How does it operate? What are its policies and procedures related to the thing that it does? And are those the kinds of things we would support in a just society? That's where we should have dialogue, right? Related to that, we don't have that useful dialogue. What we focus on is ideology, right? Does this business align with my worldview? Does this politician align with my worldview? They wax and wane poetically about their libertarian stance or their socialist stance or their, classical liberalism. That's nice. Who cares? What are you actually going to do, right? How do you apply that a libertarian approach to managing a public education system, right? Or what we do is we focus on their character, right? We say, this is a bad person. This is a good person. Vote for me. I'm just like you, right? And what we should do, I apologize for my cat. Don't focus on character. Don't focus on ideology. Focus on policy, procedure, applied results. Great lesson for Polytechnic to be proposing. And then finally, because we're so idealistic about things like governments, not-for-profits, classical businesses, there's these external problems where we don't have a meaningful public dialogue about them. But then internally, we have this additional problem. The people that work in these institutions usually sort of give up hope. Well, it's business, can't be an ethical person. I'm here to make money for my boss. I'm here to do my job. And then they fall into moral traps, right? They disengage. And so then they don't think about the moral impacts of the decisions they're making. Or they say, hey, I love my institution. I'm a libertarian, just like my political party. I believe in the mission. Therefore, we can do no wrong. And again, you miss all the ethical complexity of the things you're doing on a day-to-day basis. So he thinks that's where our discussion is, and that's what's valuable about something like professional ethics, is we focus on the practical results of the institutions that we interact with. We focus on how they are governed, the policies and the procedures, and then we focus internally on how the employees think about themselves and their day-to-day actions and making sure that they have the tools to critically think about the ethical implications of what they're doing. And that's the value in professional ethics. All right, I'm going to stop this video. One more coming on ethical relativism. Thank you much.